Good evening, everyone. So this is security and governance birds of feather. Okay, just want to make sure they are in the right room. We are expecting a couple of more people to come in, but this is going to be an interactive session where you can ask questions of any issues you have or where you need some clarification, and we can discuss this. Or if you have any specific requirements which you're trying to implement, and this is a good time to talk about those at clarity. Myself, I'm Matan Nitiraj. I'm part of Apache Ranger and Apache Atlas PMCs. I've been working with Ranger for like 4 years and Atlas for about 2 years. I lead security and governance engineering in Hortonworks. And here are people who are the core committers for Ranger. So here's one Bosco, he's one of the founders of Ranger. Vale, he runs Ranger Engineering in Hortonworks. Ramesh, so he's been one of the founding member of Ranger. And Abhay. So these three are all PMCs. Like there are 5 PMCs from Ranger side, and there's 1 PMC from Atlas. Ali, he runs the partner engineering at Hortonworks. Right. So these are the folks I know. So you can get started.
So do you guys want to give update on what you guys did last year? Ranger?
So do you have a list?
Yeah, I don't know how many people attended the session Abhay and Ramesh did.
You all can come in the front, actually. It'll be better.
They have given a pretty good overview of all the features that went in Apache Ranger 1.0. We have some really great features. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, the main thing is we have now classification-based data masking. That is a key feature which is having a good impact in the community. And the next one is we have the time schedulable policy where you have policies and you can schedule those policies within a range of time, and you can add a time zone attribute to that, so that if an event occurs at a particular time, that time this policy comes into picture and it makes the decision to allow or deny. That is one key feature which is there now. And the next one is prioritization of policy. There is a policy there which when a Ranger evaluates the policies, it has its own implicit rules to evaluate the order in which it has to do the evaluation. So that is an implicit priority. It has now we have exclusively. You can explicitly on the policy level you can have an override flag. Actually, it has an override flag by saying that okay, this is going to precede any of the normal policies which you have. So that is a very important feature when you want to have when you want to resolve something like temporarily you allow somebody during this period of time, so you can use that. Yeah, and and maybe Abhay can talk more on that.
Also, we have very better integration between Atlas and Ranger, so it works more seamlessly, faster. There is also several small features which are not necessarily small features, but ease of installation and the ease of upgrades that has been implemented. Various plugins have been upgraded depending on the new security requirements, the new resources, new accesses that different plugins, most notably Hive and Kafka. Atlas is implemented its own more fine-tuned security model, which is also implemented using some changes to Ranger. So Ranger model is enhanced to do that. Furthermore, for the people who write new plugins, Ranger plugins, there are a lot of improvements done in the service definition module itself to make it clearer. The model is better. There are more checks, and it is something really to be appreciated when you develop a new plugin. And there are numerous performance improvements. The performance has gone up substantially. The policy evaluation performance, I think we put in try earlier, right?
It's
We also
been about
implement-
2 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also implemented try. There is an indexing of policies. So even if you have thousands of policies, because of this indexing feature, at most a set of 4 or 5 policies will be actually considered for evaluation when the access request is really made. So that means overall access evaluation time is really, really short. So the overhead of having Ranger as your authorizer has gone down substantially.
Yeah,
So
so
these
just
are
a quick question. How many of you are already using Ranger currently? And okay,
I think
many
it
of
would be
you.
worth knowing what are the pain points. I mean, we can see.
And right, and that's why. And how long you've been using Ranger for? Approximately about a year or like few years or recently?
Depending on my experience in multiple companies, probably. Yeah, probably about 2 years.
2 years. Okay,
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
And that's the primary tool, right, in Hadoop if you wanted to secure anything. And I came from healthcare, and security governance is a big thing.
Okay.
So can I ask a requirement that we have and see if you guys have any ideas how can
Sure.
we implement? So we have an interesting requirement called purpose-based access. So purpose-based access means depending on what purpose I wanted to use the data, the data will be either allowed or they'll not let me use. I'll give you an example. I'm a data scientist, and I support both care management as well as marketing, right? So when I'm doing a care management type of analysis, I can get some of the personal information, right? I can use them to run my analytics to deliver better care to the patient. But as a marketing analytics analyst or data scientist, when I'm trying to come up with an insight where I can sell you something more, I'm not allowed to use certain data.
Okay.
Right? And I, as an individual, I belong to both the roles, right? As in my LDAP, I have both the roles, and my user ID is attached to both. Now, how can I implement this requirement using maybe Ranger, Atlas, depending on what is my purpose? Either I will be allowed or rejected to access certain data.
Just to get a little bit of clarification on your requirement. So it sounds a bit similar to the GDPR one where there's multiple consents, right? You could have a consent for marketing versus a consent for loyalty or whatever. So it almost sounds like, depending on what the purpose the data is for, the patient may need to give different types of consent. Is that accurate?
Yes, it's similar. So the GDPR, of course, the European, they have defined that way, but it's similar. I think in US also, especially in the, it's not driven by consent, but it's driven by the law, right? So the data for what purpose you can use is governed by the law. So that's where I think some of the
Ranger actually,
officers,
Ranger policy engine, let me get to that quickly, Bosco, 1 second. So it is possible, but the key is when do you know the purpose of it? If you can somehow let Ranger know at the time of request, then you can make the decision. You can use that to make a decision whether to authorize or not. So what I'm saying is, Ranger, when it evaluates access request, there's a notion of context. And if you can inject a context that this user is accessing in the context of marketing or some other research, then based on the context, the Ranger policy evaluation can change the result.
So you are saying Ranger has a concept of context that we can leverage to implement this
Correct.
kind of
So there's a notion of context enricher, which, let's say somebody is trying to access a Hive table, and Hive is going to ask Ranger, okay, this is a user, the user belongs to this group, and he's trying to access this, perform select on a table, right? So before Ranger goes about looking at all the policies for evaluating whether user access or not, it calls registered what so-called the context enrichers. So you can put your own context enricher there, which can inject some more context into the evaluation time itself. Then Ranger policies, when you author the policy, you can refer to that context, and you can make a decision whether to allow or not, depending on the context values.
No, thank you. I think we were thinking of building our own API layer to orchestrate that kind of a access, right? And then say what role will pass on to the Ranger. But I think this is a better solution, because if Ranger provides that kind of a concept, as the context concept, right? I think it's probably better for us to
Is it
leverage that.
specific to an application that you're looking at, or what will uniquely determine what that purpose, or what is the context in which that needs to be allowed? How will you determine that?
It's not an application, right? It's the data science users, depending on what they are doing, they're ready to provide that additional information, right? What I'm going to do with this data. So we were thinking of creating an API, our own API orchestration layer, and then somehow wrap it around Ranger to get that, saying, hey, this is the either the, say, care analyst role versus a marketing analyst role, right? That's what we were thinking, but I think the context probably is a better concept.
But if
that we
it's
can
just
leverage.
role-based, aren't those roles in your LDAP or AD?
Yeah, I'm part of both the roles, right?
So essentially, this is a pretty common use case we get, where there's a data scientist. You may be doing sometimes, you may use the same data for sometimes for fraud detection, and sometimes you may do for marketing. So you can't differentiate. So some of the suggestions that we're given for users like that, you have a portal where the user goes and just say, I'm going to do this one. Then it's applicable for all of them. And what Madan said, that's what we did. There's a preprocessor. You can go and enrich it. In that one, you can make an API call and say, for this user, what is my current role? So you will come in the morning. We have use cases where they work on that project for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, just on one project. Then for the 2 weeks, they will be doing a particular job. Then you can use that as a dynamic condition within Ranger, and that will be uniform across all the plugins. Does that make sense?
So there is also additionally in Ranger 1, it's coming out with HTTP3, we also have the notion of time-based policies. So if you want to provide temporary privileged access for a particular duration, you can set that and have that override your regular permissions.
But this will be based on the user, right?
User.
It's not on the time.
Right.
Right, I'm saying in addition to the time dimension also can be added to that.
Yeah, one of the example you see in our Ranger wiki pages, depending on the IP address user comes in, so you can associate IP address to different locations, different countries, right? So there's a context enricher which takes this IP address, which is part of the request, and then does a lookup on another location database and adds to the context about which country, which state, which city it is from. Then Ranger policies can be written based on the countries. If the user comes from, let's say, UK, then you would want them to be not able to see certain data sets. So all those different things you can do via context enricher. There is an example in a Ranger wiki page for this one. It walks you through what are the steps you need to go through that. But the key is you still need to be able to somehow detect the context. In the sense, the user is accessing a table, you need to know whether the user is accessing in the context of marketing or some other analysis. So how would you know that? You still have to maintain it and give it to the policy evaluation.
And how do I pass that information?
No, that you will have to make an API call from the context to something. So you can have it in HBase if you want to, and just make sure you update it. So every time the user comes in, you make a call and do it, and you can cache it also if you want to. Yeah. But it won't be per request. It will be for whatever the session is. Right. Session means like if you say whatever the till you change. So at any given time, it will be only one role you'll be using it. Make sense?
With context enrichers, it cannot.
No, the problem is you can't do it across all the plug.
It just depends on how you enrich the context.
Right.
It's completely up to you.
Yeah, so Abe, the problem is if you're doing Hive, you can't pass on additional. You can't make one call with the fraud intention, another one with the same thing.
So I need to log out and then log in again with the new.
Yeah, it's ideally it's better to do it out of the band and update somewhere else and pull it in the real time.
That will be session-based.
Not necessarily, it's a time-based. You say, today morning, I'm going to say I'm going to work on fraud. Until you change it, it's always fraud.
Yeah, the key thing is that as long as this information is part of the context, you can write a dynamic policy containing policy condition and which can do the right thing as far as access as well as data masking. Whatever other features that Ranger provides, you can do all of that with that dynamic condition.
That's true.
Do you currently have Knox?
Yes, we do.
Maybe a way to do that would be to pass that information as you put a perimeter and add some additional kind of other information.
I think that recommend came in one of the recent mailing lists or customer RAS. They really wanted to get some they want to look at the HTTP header and then make a Ranger authorization decision based on the HTTP header. So it means we need to pass the context into the policy engine. We saw that requirement, right? Yeah.
Let's go to the next
Yeah, just as a quick one, Bosco asked about what we did for last 1 year. Let me give a quick overview of what Ranger did in 4 years, okay, if I can do that. So we started with like 5 components, Hdfs, Hive, HBase, Trom, and then I think Knox. So these were the 5 components about like 4 years back. Ranger provided authorization. Right now, Ranger has authorization for about 10 components. We added NiFi, Atlas, and then Kafka, Scoop, and there are few added from the community as well, like Kylin, right? There are about 10 components for which you can set authorization from a central place. So that's the one. And then in addition to being able to authorize on a per resource base, we also Ranger community added classification-based authorization. This was added like, I think, 2 years back. Right. And then we extended Ranger to support data masking for sensitive data at the column level, at the Hive column level. Then we extended this to enable data masking based on classification itself. So instead of going to individual columns, you just classify a bunch of columns which are sensitive. You just add classification to it in Atlas. And then data masking, a single data masking policy will be applied for that. And recently, we added enhancements like time-bound policies, where you can kind of specify which time duration the policy should be effective at the time of creation. Then Ranger will evaluate the policies only for the time specified there. Even though policy is present and active, it won't be effective beyond that time. So there are a bunch of other enhancements we have done right now. That's a broad overview. Huh?
Row level filtering.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. Thanks, Bosco. So just like data masking for columns, you can also specify row filters in Ranger itself for Hive. So depending on the user group he belongs to and various other conditions, you can return only certain subset of results from a table. So it's at least been a year right now.
253, 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago, yeah. And the beauty of this is you can all do this right from policy administration side. You don't have to change your code. You don't have to do anything. So you would just go to Ranger admin administration portal and say the users from, let's say, HR or HR in US, they will be able to see only US employee data. So even though there's an application code doesn't have to change for this one.
Yeah, so if you look from, traditionally people used to use views. They used to use views for doing that. So you had to create multiple views. So what we have done is we worked with the Hive community, and now you can write a predicate along with the policy itself. So you can have, for one given policy, you can have multiple conditions, and each condition have a different predicate. So in other words, when you're running, let's assume you have one table which says, okay, these are the customers, these are the countries they belong to, you can actually do a where clause and do something like that.
But so anything that's valid Hive SQL predicate, you can stick there.
And you can do joins, anything you want.
So basically, whatever query I run, it will add that.
Exactly. It'll add that thing to, transparently.
Yeah.
So where this comes in handy is, for example, if you're trying to master your consent data for GDPR, and let's say you have which customers have given consent, when is the consent expiring, for what purpose they're giving. It's a simple lookup you can do there, and anytime anybody tries to access the data in your data lake, you can filter out the access based on who's given consent and whether the consent is expired or not.
Introduce the Knox team and the Atlas team.
Right, there are a few more additions here. Let me quickly introduce. Larry, introduce yourself.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I am Larry McKay.
Yeah, sorry.
Larry McKay. I am the PMC chair for Apache Knox, security architect at Hortonworks, and a committer on Ranger, Metron, and Hadoop.
Right.
Thanks. My name is Phil Zampino. I've been working on Apache Knox for almost 1 year now. I'm a PMC member, work on the security and governance team at Hortonworks. Yeah.
Srikanth, you should come up here. Come.
Yeah. My name is Sandeep More, and I'm a PMC member and a committer on Apache Knox. And yeah, I've been working on Knox since the last 2 years.
No, we did.
Yeah, we introduced.
My name is Srikanth Venkat, so I'm responsible for the security and governance portfolio. So all of these guys, what they're working on, essentially. No, I'm the person they bait every time they have a problem. So.
Yeah, I'm done.
And we have one more Atlas committer, Hemant here. Yep. All right. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sir.
so I have a question. We do So I have a question. So, Hortonworks and I'm from Protegrity. So, we have many joint customers. And I see this Ranger integration all the time, and we integrate with Ranger. But I don't see a lot of Knox. So I would like to know what is the Knox message for ISVs?
Okay. Srikanth or Larry, who wants to take this?
So Knox, if you look at what Knox does, it is REST API gateway, provides authentication, federation, credentials propagation, gives you things like shielding your users from all the Kerberos complexity, shielding maybe shading the SSL at the perimeter, lots of different things. So as an ISV, I don't know if you're going to be building any capabilities that in Knox other than making sure that your infrastructure works when you have a Knox-enabled cluster. I mean, I don't know. So he was asking what are the opportunities for other ISVs in terms of maybe adding capabilities to Knox, et cetera.
Yeah.
So specifically for adding capabilities to Knox? Okay, so at a high level, I would explain Knox this way. We actually provide 3 different sets of services to consumers. And we started with proxying services of primarily REST APIs, but we've also begun doing UIs, which is our bread and butter as a gateway product. But we extracted our pluggable provider infrastructure out of there, and we also present authentication services. So you're able to compose pipelines of providers for authentication and for authorization and for dispatch or for even plugging in your own APIs. And we have some high-level APIs for a feature we call Knox SSO, which allows you to do web SSO type flows for browser access of UIs. We also have a service called Knox Token, which allows you to get a token that you can then use as a bearer token for REST APIs. And those services become very useful when you're trying to maybe talk between clusters, things like that, where you want to use cryptographically authenticated sessions, security context across these 2 boundaries, right? So then the third set of services that we provide are client-facing services. And we have a module, and it's a separate release artifact called Knox Shell. And Knox Shell consists of a set of Java classes underneath, which some folks are actually using directly as an SDK. And then those same classes are used as the underlying classes for a Groovy-based DSL that we provide for providing access to HTTP resources through Knox. And we use Groovy because you can use closures, so you can do some nice async type scripting in really powerful and interesting ways.
So one quick question here, just on the ISV side. So just to get a context here, what kind of ISV integrations you do with Ranger, and that'll help us kind of understand what you can do on the Knox side.
Yeah, so, as our Hortonworks customers, like big customers, like they all use Ranger, right? So our Protegrity users, right? So when you go to Hive, some table, right? The way we're integrating right now is, once the user is authorized by Ranger, Ranger is the first. Then only our Protegrity user policy, role policy, all these roles kick in, right? So that's the integration we have. And like last year, we said with a custom masking function, we can change it to our protect and protect function.
Okay.
So that's the type of integration we have, right? But I want to get some ideas because user is key, and HTTP and the REST, because our next generation of product, we're exposing everything to REST. A lot of sessions, containerized microservices. Srikanth knows, it's coming, right? So we'd have to explore and exploit, anything that is there.
Yeah, actually, that's...
There are two things there.
Okay.
So one is you mentioned, those from a Knox perspective. One of the things you could look at is, can you leverage the single sign-on if you have your own services, for exposure via Knox, and then consume either single sign-on, whatever method that you're using to authenticate and get those users into in the same standard way that the rest of the Hadoop services will leverage. Okay. So you can do the same thing as another first-class Hadoop service will provide. It's very easy to extend Knox to do that in your case. The other thing where I think may be useful is also this other previous use case that we looked at, where if you need additional contextual information to be passed into your service, that is also another additional parameter or something that you can use that can be used to maybe disambiguate your user and maybe provide additional context, like what is their protected role, for example, if you need that. On a Knox protected cluster. So those kinds of things are very easy extensions.
Yeah, that is excellent.
Yeah. And specifically for, now that you've mentioned this, we have one feature in Ranger 1.0 that's specifically for ISVs such as yourself, where you're using UDFs to do your actions such as decryption, right? Yes. So up until HTTP 3 and Ranger 1.0, the authorization of UDFs was restricted to creation and drop. We were never authorizing the actual usage of the UDFs. What you will be able to do now with the 1.0 version of Ranger is you will be able to generate audits for every use of that UDF. So for example, you have a sort of calling select on the column, you're calling select decrypt on that column, where decrypt is the UDF that...
We're not collecting the logs. Yeah.
Correct. So now we'll get Ranger audits, and you can also authorize that who gets to see that, who gets to run the decrypt function from Hive perspective. So Hive is going to call us with all of those UDFs. So any third-party UDFs that you are making permanent UDFs in that environment and are registered in that environment, we will now be able to generate audit logs on it in one place and also provide Ranger-based authorization. So you can just do a REST call to impose whatever policies you have currently in your environment and have Ranger do the work of enforcing it.
Okay, very good. Okay.
And if you're planning to expose REST API to end users, and then the Knox proxy also is another thing you might want to consider, right? Yeah.
Follow up with this question, like for Knox. So as a future, whether the Knox will become like a client for all the Hadoop services, we don't want to implement any CLI-based client for a Hadoop cluster. Can we move in that direction, or is it Knox considering to move in that direction?
Well, Knox is continually bringing in new service definitions for new APIs and UIs and stuff like that. So in that respect, it's going to continue to be a client to more and more components. You can, and this is one of my visions for Knox Shell, the client side of this, is instead of having to log, SSH to some gateway node where you have Hadoop installed so you can access these things with CLIs, you can use things like the Groovy-based DSL to do anything you want as long as you have line of sight of a Knox instance. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, so we have now lots of problems with managing our CLIs as such, right? Like lots of customers are using. So there are like a lot of services which Knox actually helping in the terms of API. So people can use from different zones without any restrictions. They can leverage the Hadoop as in a REST API itself, right? Rather than, so if Knox is considering in that direction, then we will be happy for using in a better way. Like we can get rid of CLIs as such, and we can just use our Knox as a solution for all the applications we can just directly use through REST API.
Sure, yeah. So the Knox shell classes are something that we have to continually keep in pace with the service proxying capabilities that we have. So we are continually adding more client-side support, but get involved with the community and at least make it known which ones in particular that you would like, and contribute to whatever degree you can and would like to.
Okay.
Absolutely. And they're relatively easy to implement as well.
Yeah, so the CLI is like so distributed, like if Knox is the central point, it's very easy to put our Ranger policies in and you can audit all together, all the logs together in a central place, right? So
Absolutely, yep.
So,
Like Larry said, if you can get involved in the community and see which are the ones a high priority, you're looking for, we can prioritize that. It will help the community prioritize.
Yep.
And the more we hear from the users, and it'll help us.
Yeah.
The other piece also where you may be able to leverage is, eBay has a lot of custom authentication schemes, like you have your own 2FA kind of things, right? So that's another thing where you can help the community by providing us input on how we want to prioritize those type of authentication schemes. We are looking for actively at MFA kind of approaches, see what else is other authentication patterns, what are the ones that you have in your environments that we could develop some standardized solutions for, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you have to do an authentication scheme for that.
I have a question about Atlas.
Sorry?
So my question is specifically about we recently started using Atlas for Hive table data modeling, but we are not sure how to do with the HDFS, and would like to understand how the other Atlas customers are doing the HDFS data modeling on Atlas at this point, because we have huge multi-tenant clusters which consist of 4,000 nodes or around 5K nodes, right? Hive is not the only entry point, so there are multiple entry points. HDFS is definitely one of them. So without HDFS hook, it's not going to be complete.
Right. So this comes to Atlas community a lot. Internally, Srikanth has been asking us to build it for a long time, and even Hemant is also on board on that ask. But one of the challenges, we want to understand what use cases you're looking for in having HDFS file information in Atlas. The biggest concern is HDFS can end up having like the 300 million files or maybe a billion files, right? Then having that much metadata in Atlas, it may not be what you really want. So we want to know what this, a few concrete use cases. Maybe you are interested in only certain directories and not at the file level, not temporary files and only. So we just want to get more and more clarity on that few use cases, then we should be able to do that part.
The idea here is if we turn it on for everything, you're going to get a lot of useless information you don't care about. And it's going to slow things down because you have to process all those entities and will become the next name node. Because the metadata at some point is going to become the same size as the data. So
maybe more than that.
Yeah, so that's a challenge. So we're trying to make sure that we have a pragmatic, cut of what makes sense, what kind of filtering do you want. It'll be helpful if we have specific requirements around those to say, we care about maybe like an inclusion-exclusion list or, some other means to do this so we can make this a very configurable kind of connector rather than just, you suck everything up as a fire hose and, push it into Atlas, right?
Yeah. That was helpful, but my question is specifically about other production environments, right? Are they using Hive as the only entry point where Atlas has deployed?
No, we have other connectors, right? We do have Kafka Storm.
No. So my question is basically, are these clusters are having Hive as the only entry point, or Kafka? Wherever you have Atlas hooks, are you disabling any MapReduce or Spark job running on HDFS? The reason is from a security perspective, right? If we are tagging a data as PII, it should not be accessible by anyone else.
Absolutely.
But if you are not modeling the HDFS entity on Atlas, then Ranger won't be able to.
Actually, let me quickly correct that. Yeah, so exactly. Atlas actually has entity type for HDFS files. So you can actually make API calls, or you can go to Atlas UI and create HDFS path entity there. You can associate tags and classifications to those, and Ranger will enforce authorization on those entities. Okay. Yeah. But what is not there is automatically populating Atlas of all the files in HDFS. So that's not there. We are being kind of cautious on that because once we turn that on, and it has a potential to kind of flood Atlas with so much of information, which may not be useful at all actually. You may not be interested in knowing every file which is in HDFS. Yeah. But today you can actually make a REST API call or go to Atlas UI and create a HDFS entity and add tags to that. I'm not sure whether you tried that approach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, so, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
So we are already tagging the HDFS
Paths.
paths, right?
Okay.
But it's a scale challenge, right? 100 million entries on one single data warehouse. So we want to understand from the community how others are doing at this point, because it is not practically possible to day-to-day basis to maintain it without a. So actually, I know that we had a series of discussion with Todd and Srikanth and all. So we know where the community is going. It's not coming even in HTTP3. So, but we want to understand how others are doing with Atlas at this point, especially on HDFS data modeling. So it's a more, rather than to HDFs, this question is more to
on the
community.
Side. Actually, in the community side, I don't remember a lot of discussion which come from the user dev list on the HDFS side. I know internally our customers have been asking, so that's where we know.
So, I mean, the key here is this. For a file which is, based on Hive, you're going to get that entity, right? For a file based on anything, any of the other services for which you have a hook, let's say Storm is dropping something into HDFS, for those cases, the HDFS entities will be present. Where you will not have it is you're using some other means to put that data in, or your custom transformation, you're taking one file, running a Spark job or something and creating it. Even for Spark, we have a Spark hook that's in 1.0. In Atlas 1.0 and HTTP3, we have a tech preview of the Spark hook that will cover all of these scenarios. It covers Spark SQL, it covers Spark ML, it covers just generic Spark transforms. So that hook has been built with the Spark community, closely working with them. And then we're calling that a tech preview simply because there are some things around scale, like you mentioned, right, where you could have like gazillion Spark jobs that are doing all kinds of transformations, and that is very, very detailed. It actually covers a lot of, takes like model evolution, all of these things into account and shows the lineage and all that. So it's very comprehensive hook, and we have the first cut of that in about a month. The early access bits are already available, and the Spark hook will be part of that. So if you want to test that out and give us feedback, that's already there. For Spark, it's there. Now, outside of all of these contexts, let's say you're just putting in some PDF files there randomly through some other custom process. That is a part that we'll have to address to see what makes sense out of that. Is there some filter that you would want? How would you want to see which parts of the ecosystem of the whole file system that you want to really focus on, and you care about tagging or care about having metadata for? If you put everything in there, then it's as good as not doing that for you, because you're going to have to go search and figure out whether this is useful or not. So instead, is there a way we can have a more nuanced approach to have a configuration to show which ones you're going to push into this mix?
Thank you.
Just before we move on, so you talked about like hundreds of thousands of files, right? So that is the exact challenge we have. Do users really need to see this many files? So what's the use case you might want to see in Atlas, and what do you want to do there? Yeah.
I'm going to kind of add on to what he says.
Okay, you can take me.
Yeah. I will not name the companies, but there are products, right, which can scan whole HDFS, they tag it, get the metadata, and they can let you do discovery.
Okay.
Very, very important.
Right.
Right. So that is a strong use case, because I know the company where I was working, they want to do exactly the same thing. And as you said, there are billions of data points. So they have to build a graph database into metadata manager. Exactly for that, to do discovery. I just want to give you a context.
Okay.
So we do have, it's not
Thank you.
in the Apache community, but we do have the Data Steward Studio, which essentially is a step in that direction. So we're going to be able to crawl all types of content, profile using, crack open the content, or at least do metadata level inspection, and provide automated suggestions around content, metadata tags, all of that. But that's not in, per se a first class feature of Atlas. Atlas is going to receive that data. Atlas is the metadata repository for all of those annotations, but Atlas does not have that profiler today. So it's part of the Data Steward Studio product. That is open source also. It's just not Apache open source. It's AGPL.
I had two questions, actually, three questions. One is for Ranger. So is there a future plan to introduce like other sources for auditing? Because, previously it was to a database, and now it's Solar. And, Solar, if we have issues here and there, and also, the access point for that. So, if there's any other source you guys plan to offer, because we gotta, isolate the logs from, admins, and so.
Can I ask you which source you're looking for or destination you're looking for?
I mean, even considering, bringing back Oracle or SQL Server or.
So the design is.
Bosco, take the mic. Yeah, thank you.
So.
Yeah. Repeat the question.
No, you
Yeah.
want to?
So,
Yes, two more
let me
questions.
repeat the question. So the question is, currently, Ranger supports few audit destination or audit stores, we call it. One is, we used to support RDBMS. So now, because of scaling, we kind of, it's not RDBMS, it's not first class supported, but we support writing audits to Solar and then Hdfs. Now, the question is about where else audit can be written. Is the community thinking about storing audit, for example, in Oracle database? Is that a question?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Oracle database, or SQL Server database, so it's isolated.
So just to answer your question, right? First of all, you have to be careful when you put to database. There's a specific reason we took it out. What happened is the number of audit that comes in gets so much that we were actually killing the database. But saying that the architecture is pretty open. Out of the box, there's a destination concept. You can write your own extension and can do whatever you want to do. So we used to have Kafka, we took it out. Now instead of that, we introduced something called Log4j appender. So in other words, anything that Log4j appender works, it will work for you. So if you have you can use a Kafka Log4j appender, it will go to a Kafka. If you have a database, it will go to a database also. So without any code change, you can do it if you want to. So.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
The other thing to think about here is assuming that, is this your issue that you're noticing performance with the Solar, or you want aggregated views of it? What exactly is driving that?
Yeah, the isolation of the logs from sysadmin access as well.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
But you can put a Ranger policy on that path, right? Can you?
By default, it goes to the, if you're using HTTP, it will go to the infra one.
Oh, it's the infra. Okay, I see.
But you can always use your own Solar and you can put a Ranger on top of it. And that will take care of the access control for you. Just for information, we also send it to Hdfs by default. So it's Hdfs and Solar.
Okay. All right, and my other question is for Knox. So is there a future plan to, introduce HA for Knox? Is there?
So our HA story at the moment is basically we're stateless. You put a load balancer in front. So what are you looking for other than that?
I mean, another instance of Knox, you can manage through Ambari.
Like load balancer?
You can do that today. So
you can do that.
You can add multiple instances of Knox through Ambari today, but you have to manage your own load balancer to go across those.
Okay.
And then you would use the load balancer URL, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah, they may have changed the names. They used to be config groups, right?
Groups,
so you could add multiple instances inside the same config group. You can also introduce new config groups. So then you would probably want another load balancer or somehow segment, that off some other way.
Okay. And the other question is there any, future plan to improve the performance, bottleneck of Knox,
In the context of web HDFS or?
Yeah,
or
just going through it.
Or just in general?
Yeah.
So, where we know that there are problems, we should fix them.
Right.
It's not likely we're ever going to speed up traffic going through, going through a gateway.
Yeah.
But, certainly we're aware of performance issues. And,
So that's probably why you are thinking about load balancer and multiple Knox instances.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. See if that will help or not. Yeah. So.
The main thing on Knox is, as Larry mentioned, it's a proxy. So you're going to be always limited by the bandwidth and other things. So the only way to scale is to have multiple. It's not a unique problem to Knox.
No.
So that's why your use case is very important. If you're trying to do ETL process through Knox, it's not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So we had users who were trying to do that, trying to upload data and all that. No, that's not the use case. You should look at the use case and see what is the right one.
Okay.
You know any specific use case?
Are you looking at specifically some kind of JDBC?
Yeah, JDBC.
That's what I suspect.
Yeah.
we don't, JDBC, at least for Hive, we cannot proxy if it's like in the binary mode, for example, right? Because it's not HTTP.
Yeah,
So
HTTP.
it depends on how you're using those, and a lot of these JDBC connectors, they have their own, their own nuances and problems with each the way these are going. So there are some customers who wanted the JDBC binary connectivity, instead of using HTTP via Knox, and they were. I think there's an issue with being able to even proxy that, because this is not really a protocol that Knox is designed to handle. It's kind of like saying you want to proxy RPC. So
Right. I mean, in the back of our minds, we think, well, we've added WebSocket support, and we might be able to do something fancy with that, but we do not have it on the immediate roadmap as something concrete that we're going to look at anytime soon. But come to the community and talk about it, and we can see where we can take it. One of the things we do in at least in the Knox project is we kind of drive each release based on one or more KIPS, Knox improvement proposals. So it's kind of a one-pager to capture use cases for cloud or capture improvements for rewrite rules or whatever. So if you have something like that you'd like to bring and propose, we can start a KIP for that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I really like Data Steward Studio. It's really a good direction for people like us to combine all the products in one place and start using it. Also, like the policy concept, even though Apache Ranger as a separate product does that, but within that studio, it's really easier to understand, and we can think up implementing data governance using that one. I have a question on masking concept, data masking. What kind of algorithm it uses? Can we set a policy to define that, it's like SHA 256 encryption or custom encryption or shuffling the characters? What kind of masking can we implement or can you see?
Right. So today, Srikanth, you want to take that? Okay.
So the masking feature, again, are you looking for static or dynamic masking? Because okay, so today we only do dynamic masking with, and that too with the Ranger and Hive only. And then the masking method that we have is pluggable, meaning anything that takes a column of a type and returns some transformation of the same type using Hive UDFs is game. So if you have your own custom UDFs, let's say you have a protected UDF, you can stick that in there. So there's nothing preventing you from not having a custom masking function. It's pretty open. In fact, we show in some of these Hawtonia bag examples, we show multiple types of masking where you just retain the first 4, retain the last 4, partially X out the stuff, all these kinds of things. So we have that capability already, so you can roll your own masking function if you don't find one that you like in the list we have.
Yeah, we do. I think custom masking is, of course, like you can write your own also, or you can use some third party also. That's not an issue. The main thing about the masking out of Ranger is we don't do key management out of the Ranger, so that's the main downside. Otherwise, you can do anything you want to.
Another one is the time-based policy expiration, which is very useful function. For example, we have people coming in and going out, like consultants. So we want to set the time, and then that way, we don't have to worry about. We still want to keep the LDAP access everything because we don't want to totally access. Sometimes they move from one project to another project. We don't want to have access to the data. So that way, if Ranger has a policy expiration, concept, it's easier. Also, if there is a way to update the metadata, Ranger metadata, by reinstating the policy, that would be really good without manually going and updating the policy.
Yeah, for that, Ranger has a very rich set of APIs. You can always, anything that you can do from the UI, you can do with API. And we have a lot of users who are doing that, in fact.
Let me put it this way. Treat me as an end user.
Okay.
I would like to see everything on the UI. That way, it's easier for me to really implement end-to-end data governance using a Data Steward Studio.
Yeah.
So you want to be able to do it via Data Storage Studio. Is that what?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is actually a good question. So what we are looking at doing is the whole premise of Data Plane, including Data Storage Studio, is that we want to give you a central pane of glass for all of this. Today, this policy management is local. So over time, what we will do is we can give you a policy authoring experience where you can set this policy and devise which targets it needs to go to. So we can give you an interface in the future where we'll be able to define your policy in one place, have it apply to assets that are strewn across multiple clusters, and have it be enforced uniformly. Same thing for example, the new business catalog that we're introducing in Atlas, right? At some point, you don't want to be defining terms in each cluster. It doesn't make any sense, and people could make mistakes, etc. So we will provide a unified authoring experience from here, so it will get pushed down to Atlases or Rangers in the individual cluster. So that's the evolution path we're going towards. The other piece what kind of updates are you looking at when you said the end user needs to be able to do?
So in a business scenario, like policy means totally different way. So I'm trying to add a business context, like, if you add up a workflow concept in the policy, it would be really useful. For example, I set a policy like, data file step. People keep creating data files. I don't want to manually go and delete. I don't want to, automatically write a script to clean up everything. So we can set a policy, certain type of, permissions, people who have this, permissions. Okay. Leave the policy, leave the data files in the system, but rest of them, clean up. So if you have workflow concept, like here is a policy, if it's really, enforced, go and look at these things. Maybe we can write a custom, code to run the actual execution of steps. Mm-hmm. But if policy has the ability to execute these things or call these steps, would be really good.
Okay, so there are two things there. One is in Data Storage Studio and by extension in Data Plane, we are looking at adding a first-class workflow engine, like a BPMN engine. So that way you can do all of these kinds of workflows, notifications, all of those. Because governance without that is not going to be useful. So we want to be able to add, that capability to say we will support first-class workflows that will stitch together all of these components and give you that unified experience. The second piece of this is you were talking about, it's not just these workflows. You want to be able to do some, is it like just pipelining or
steps? Actually, yeah, it's pipeline. So okay. So policy alone is not really helpful. Like right now, it's like Ranger enforces the policy on basic things. Mm-hmm. But if you want to extend the policy into full enforcement, like we would like to have flexibility in running some steps.
So one of the things that, the angle around, let's say expiring or moving things to maybe colder storage and things like that, the DLM product will have auto tiering kind of capabilities, and then that might help with some of these things. Let's say, for example, you want to keep moving this to colder and colder storage, you can either have a set policy that says after a certain period of time this data is not touched to move this over, or you could say dynamically infer the usage based on the usage patterns and then start auto tiering based on, detected usage. So those kinds of things will also leverage, some of our Atlas tagging, for example, to inform DLM which ones need to be pulled out and things like that. So we have, other integration points with, DLM, for example, that can help with the life cycle angle of this. But the other piece for workflow will directly be something that we have in Data Storage Studio and by extension in Data Plane.
Thank you.
Regarding Knox, so even though Knox is actually designed for perimeter security, what the customers are doing is they are pulling terabytes, tens and hundreds of terabytes through Knox. So, and I read somewhere Knox is not actually designed for huge amount of data transfer. So do you know, do you see any issue with that? What is your general, this is a roadmap question, right? How should, we are not sure how should we position Knox at this moment. So it is working, but still it's not very easy to manage.
So are those, you're running JDBC and getting
no,
large
it's just
users?
HDFS pools.
Just HDFS pool, okay.
Yeah, reads and writes. Yeah.
So again, I didn't totally hear, but one of the things you're always going to run into with Knox or any other single gateway like that is you can't take advantage of the architectural optimizations that are built into Hadoop. So if you're using straight web HDFS, you're going to be redirected to a data node, right? Whereas, you know, when we intercept that, we have to rewrite that redirect so it comes back again through the same choke point, right? Now, you can scale that with a load balancer across multiple Knox instances, but you're not going to get the same scalability that you will going direct to HDFS. It's just, I've kind of racked my brain trying to fix it architecturally, but I don't think it's really something you can do.
Okay. It'd be interesting to understand what that use case is.
So one, our current Knox installation will have around 15 nodes behind a load balancer, right? That is why it is able to support hundreds of terabytes of bandwidth per day basis. But the main issue is sometimes it fails weirdly with compressed files. So it's very difficult to trace down what's actually happening, and compressed files, this is the pattern we are seeing. The rest of the files will go through, but compressed files, we are not able to, there is not much information what actually happened on neither in Knox nor in the data node.
So what version are you on?
0.8.
0.8.
Knox 10, Knox 1. Yeah.
Oh, 1.0?
It's not reproducible.
It's a pass-through, but I wouldn't think I wouldn't think it'd be a problem with HDFS itself. So, I mean, you should file a JIRA.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, we have had to do some compression-related fixes in the past. Yeah.
Do you know what size file it was? Sorry.
It was pretty huge. Yeah. It was around with compression, it comes around 10 to 20 GB file.
Okay. And what compression algorithm did you use? Okay. Because we saw somebody doing that with 8 GB zip file, and they were trying to send, but somehow it got fixed. I don't know how they upgraded Knox. Okay. It got fixed, or we did not see them again on the mailing list, so we assumed it got fixed. Okay. But yeah, I think we could have done a test case.
Yeah.
Thank you.
File a JIRA and provide a test.
Yeah, the other thing you might want to do is, which version of HTTP is?
Currently 2.4.
2.4. I think you're trying to move to 2.6, I think, right?
Yeah, we will upgrade to 2.4. Yeah. So we build, Knox is, we manage our, from open source. Yeah. So another question I have is about Ranger. What is the performance benchmark? Suppose if we have hundreds or thousands of rules and we have around 300 millions of files, right? So what will be the impact of Ranger plugin deploying on name node?
So hundreds of thousands of users?
Rule set, yeah.
Okay.
With huge amount, it's a big cluster. So.
On which component? Is it for
HDFS?
HDFS, right. So the Ranger policy engine itself has been highly optimized for huge policy size. So we've tested up to internally we had tested up maybe close to 100,000, right? But we are not heard of any deployment which went up to 100,000 though. So we know up to 10,000.
Yeah, largest I've heard is we have some European customers who have between 10 and 20,000 policies.
Right.
And the reason why they would have had 10x that, because some of these macros and other shortcuts that we've introduced, plus classification-based policies, have drastically shrunk the number of policies you need to maintain. So for example, if you were able to tag HDFS, you could get away with doing maybe 10 policies instead of 10,000 if you figure out what those tags are and tag them appropriately. So our direction has always been to suggest people to go down that path to say, leverage all these other capabilities like the macros and classifications, so you don't have to go resource by resource and write policies on those.
That becomes a big manageability issue. Even if you have 100,000 policies, how do you even manage via, let's say, UI, REST APIs for it?
So this is in relation to Atlas integration, right? We are assuming it is going to be big. At this point, we don't have a number, but
okay.
Going by that data set we have, it's going to be, the rule set is going to be pretty huge.
Right.
So
using Atlas, it will be actually a lot less because we'll be doing a tag-based policy. We're not able to do it.
So the problem is going to be how do you tag those rather than, how do you tag them and maintain them efficiently rather than the number of policies. Because the policy set is going to be shrunk very, very dramatically based on.
Yeah. So one of the thing you can do is, which I know some of the customers had, most of the time you don't have to set the policy in the individual files. So if you have a table, so you have like let's say 300 or 400 partition files in it, you just have to do it at the root folder level. So you get the same level of protection. So you can dramatically reduce the number of things.
Because the wildcards and recursive.
The wildcards and recursive. Okay. And if you're going to tag based, then the number of policy will be like a few of them actually, handful. But of course, Atlas will have another problem.
Thank you.
Well, even if you have lots of policies, actually when you access a particular file or something, there will be a handful of policies that will be actually evaluated. Although, so there is a question of how much memory it will use because you have lots of policies. Obviously, memory will be larger. But we found out when we did 100,000, the memory was not that big a concern. And the access evaluation as only 4 or 5 policies typically would be really evaluated based on the resource you're accessing. It has a very weak relation with number of policies that you have.
Okay.
Yeah, the only challenge will be on the UI side. If at all you use policy management by UI, it's going to be a big challenge to kind of navigate through thousands of policies to find which policy you want to update and all. That's going to be a big challenge.
So the other thing also to understand is you have Hdfs file ACLs on the system, right? So Ranger policies, you don't want to take every ACL and do it. It's already, the default is if you don't have a policy in Ranger, then it fails back to Hdfs and evaluates it. Where you need more stringent controls than what you have in the ACL is when you really need a Ranger policy on that area. So example could be, I want to have a dynamic policy for this particular set of folders. Then you would need a Ranger policy for that. So if you're blindly trying to take your file system ACLs and create Ranger policies for those, it's not useful. So if you can get away with like the permissioning scheme that you have with whatever POSIX, kinds of things that offer you on that, you can go back and just say only for other richer or maybe subset of these policies or other things I want to superimpose on top of just the file system ACLs, that's when you really have to look at the Ranger policy. So it's another way to think about it. You may not need 100,000 policies just because you have 100,000 paths.
Sure, thank you.
You got that, right? Because and the Hdfs Ranger plugin works very uniquely from others. Basically, it first tries to see whether there is an authorization of the Ranger policies. If there's no policy talks about this particular file for this user, we just go back to Hadoop ACL, and if Hadoop allows it, then user can access it. Otherwise, they don't have access. Right. So his point is you don't need to duplicate whatever's in the Hadoop ACL into Ranger. Yeah.
Thank you.
For Ranger implementation, right? So last year when we were trying to evaluate, they were saying like you should actually block Hive Metastore to actually leverage a Ranger. Is that still true, or like you should have only one path where you can impose all the policies for Hive, right? Like Hive Server 2. If you have Hive Server 2 as well as Metastore open, in those cases it won't be very feasible to use Ranger.
Correct. So right now there is no Ranger authorizer at the Metastore level. What is that? The context is, can somebody go and create a table in Hive Metastore directly?
So
is that the question?
Remember two things. Metastore just has where the files are, folders are, right? But you can't, even if you have access to Metastore, doesn't mean that you're going to access to the file.
No, through Thrift protocol, you can access all the Hive tables, right? And you can do all
you
the
need to have, what you do is you have a do as true, do as false, okay? What happens, all the actual files are owned by Hive, okay? So when you come through Hive Server 2, then Hive Server 2 will do the authentication for the end user, okay? And will access the file using Hive. So if any other user, doesn't matter how you got it, you will not be able to access the file. So Metastore is not the critical one. The question is the file permission is the more important one. If the file permission is open, then it doesn't matter what you have in Metastore, what you have in Hive Server 2, that's no meaning, because I can just do a HDFS cat and get the file.
No, file permission is one level, like our ACLs we are setting based on a read, write, execute only, right? So if you want to put policy on top of like when you are doing insert or update or a specific column, those cases we want to go to Ranger.
Okay, so you have to be careful. I don't think.
So what kind of operation you do on Metastore for reading and writing data? And I thought you were talking.
Basically, for every Hive usage, right? There are, as of now, in our environment, we have two different doors to reach there. One is through Hive Server 2, like Beeline, or directly use your Thrift protocol to access. So since this is like two different, so if you want to use SQL-based authorization, you should implement only through Hive Server 2, right? There is nothing called as in Metastore.
Right.
So if you want to put some more control in for Metastore as well, so is that Ranger is supported, or you need to block Metastore completely, then only depend on Hive Server 2?
I think we have to take it offline. I think Metastore has no meaning actually. It's just a Metastore where it says where the table files are. Yeah. Yeah. So the way you have to look at it is see what is the permission on the file. That is what is going to determine finally who has access to it. Okay. If you have a world readable, that means you as an individual can access the file. Then Metastore Hive Server 2 has no meaning.
Okay. So that is like file level control, right? So
but doesn't matter. So if the file is open, then doesn't matter. Metastore, even Hive Server 2 doesn't matter because I can do a HDFS cat. So first thing you have to do is you have to lock down the HDFS level. So what you do is, what we recommend is, if someone might have told you, they should have told you, set the doers as false. That means Hive Server 2 will access the file using the Hive user. And you give exclusive permission to the entire folder to Hive. Okay?
No. How often you can go to that underlying file that Oracle writes to get that? You have a nice SQL interface on top. You're going to have your end users go through that.
No, my question was not like HDFS level, we have read, write, execute permissions. We are controlling that.
But which user has the permission?
It's the ownership of that. Yeah. Who's owning that file?
The table owner, right? So whoever is trying to.
Then it doesn't really matter, right? So the table you can just do HDFS cat and get it. So if I don't have access to it, then I can't get it. Even if I have access to Metastore, if I have Hive Server 2, it doesn't matter.
So I think the question also not only about getting the data, but also securing the data. Meaning,
like
from Hive, we're hoping to keep preventing users from deleting tables or dropping tables.
That's a different issue.
And allowing users to insert data, for example.
Data and meta is two different.
I understand, but so right now we're using only HDFS authorization, and we hope to move to
storage-based authorization.
Correct. We use storage-based authorization, and we hope to move to SQL-based authorization.
I would recommend is if you're going to do that, first of all, you have to make Hive exclusive the owner and remove. For storage-based authorization to work, the user and user has to have permission. So the first thing you have to remove that one.
But then it's closing any access for non-Hive use cases.
Yes. So the way we can't have both.
Complex. So this is on a EDW, so which is accessed by both Spark and Hive. I'm like,
so there are alternatives for that. If you want to go to that part, there are multiple alternatives for that. What you do is you try to find out who are the users who will need direct HDFS access. If you have an ETL user who's going to do all the job, then just give that user permission to the HDFS. Don't give to the end user. So end user always goes through the Hive Server 2. So and they will be authorized by Hive Server 2. The ETL process you give at the HDFS level. So because it doesn't matter what you give in the high level. Okay. Now, if you have end users who wants to access the HDFS due to Spark and all that, then you can't use Spark SQL as a client. Then you have to use something like a Spark SQL Thrift server and everything, and use it similar to the Hive Server 2. So you pass it through that one. Okay. In that way, then you can embed Ranger plugin Hive Server, the Thrift server, and that will do the authorization, and everything will be exactly the same. You'll use the SQL engine from Spark, but it will be submitted by the Thrift server. So you have to go to different options on that one. So, sorry.
server uses metastore, right? So that's it.
Metastore is just use where the files are.
Yeah, so after that, all things goes through the thrift protocol, right? So we don't need high server 2 at all. And those policies...
No, for data access path, you don't go through metadata, metaserver to metadata server to go through that.
You just get the location where the file is, but then the process is going to
access that, yeah.
The process owner is the important part.
So, in that case, then you have to have only authorization from Hdfs level. That's what you're saying. Like once you get the data from the metastore, like where do I have access? Then after that, it's only control is like Hdfs level.
Finally, it's always at the Hdfs. Doesn't matter how you. When you go to iServer 2, Hive has access to the data. If you're going by the end user has access.
So if you want to have a column-based policies, like some column only I want to access, in that case, it can be helpful, right? So how do
you can't have both ways. So.
Okay? Then you enable for you to high server. Then you have the column response. Okay? The reason I always keep coming to Hdfs is if you access Hdfs, then high server 2 or anything doesn't matter. I can just do Hdfs cat and get the entire file.
But Spark won't go through high server 2, right? It will use the thrift protocol to use.
The Spark that you can do, which is simulate the same thing what iServer 2 does.
We have to add some more policy externally without Ranger. That's what you're saying.
You have to use the Ranger plugin for Spark 2.
So there are a lot of changes in Hive 3.0. So I'm saying that are going to discourage very, very heavily the usage of storage-based auth. Okay, by default, Hive is going to use Ranger as the authorizer out of the box in 3.0. So when we go to HTTP 3, that's why it's better for you to start thinking now that you don't go down that model, because you lose all the fine-grained control at the column level and all that if you go down to the SBA model. So even the Hive team is saying this is not something we want to recommend. The Hive community is actually, saying we want to push this off and we want to go more towards a SQL model. And Hive is becoming more and more of a data warehouse, so they're going to lock down and make these micromanaged and, so many different things they're doing on that front. So it's good for you guys to start thinking about it because you're going to be locked into this. Say, for example, Hive CLI is going to be gone. So you're not going to have that anymore. It's going to be only beeline way of accessing it in the future. So don't build your entire model assuming that you're going to still have the file system-based coarse-grained authorization if you really want that dual mode. And Spark is also going to have a different metastore coming in 3.0. So there's a lot of changes that are happening in this HTTP 3 timeframe that we're going to get that.
Srikanth, the question is, as you say it, right, if Ranger would be the only authorizer, right, so for HTTP 3, so still I have a beeline client, but my user ID has to be in the Ranger approved. That's what you're saying?
No. All we're saying is the do as is set to false in this case, right? That means all of the file system access.
Okay.
So if you're only going through the SQL interface, then you already have the policy constructs available for that.
Okay.
So that model is not changing. It's just that we are making those changes to actively discourage the usage of SBA and keep Ranger as the first-class authorizer by default for Hive. So Hive team actually, if you have, if you want authorization in this case, by default it would turn on Ranger authorizer.
Test that.
And then we're actually looking at, they are working with some customers to provide, for example, utilities to take existing SBA models that they have and migrate them over to Ranger policies. We have some customers who asked us for that. So, yeah.
So, but since we're still on 2.4, how we can start thinking about not to use storage-based authorization if we don't have any other options right now?
I don't think 2.4 has Ranger. It should have, yeah. You have Ranger with the Hive plugin there, right? It doesn't have. Yeah, but your use case is you have an Atlas outside, right? It's not in the same cluster. It's not in the 2.4 cluster, right? No. You have an Atlas that's outside that is, okay, so they have a custom environment.
Okay.
No, I think the use case you need to understand because
yeah.
So
I think maybe the right way to think about this is to see what is your usage model? How are the users going to access? What are the different use cases and patterns through which they're going to access? Then we can figure out jointly how, what is the model that you want to have and how we migrate you more towards the Ranger model, to leverage the Ranger model better and not be locked into, you have to doing this massive migration exercise with SBA over time.
Do you guys still use Hive CLI? So that's the first thing I would ask you.
Yeah, that's the question.
We should have asked that
question first. We should
ask that question first.
No, you was asking the migration part, then I said, okay, I think that's the first thing you should do.
No, on that front.
Exactly, that's something. That's
the problem was like lots of Spark users, they at that time, like it was not able to connect through High Server 2, right? They want a Thrift protocol to connect.
Got it.
So we have to open Thrift server at the Spark 2.1, 2.2 and all those stuff. I need to evaluate like whether in the latest version
so
we...
managing your own Spark?
Yeah.
I don't know what from 2.4 they are using actually then. Only for Hadoop we are using probably 2.4.
So what is Spark 2.3? They were saying like you can get rid of Thrift and you can use directly His server 2 and all, but we didn't evaluate and all those stuff.
So they're probably using 1.2 for Hive also. What's the version?
Hive 1.2.
And just some additions that we have.
What is the question? I missed it. He came at the right time. Or not?
I think to rewire the question, so to rephrase it, so they have a lot of data in Hdfs, okay? And they have tables on top of it, and the metastore has all the meta, of course. They have High Server 2, and they have users who are going through High Server 2. They are users who are going to using Hive CLI and directly accessing the file. They have Spark SQL. Okay. Now the question is, if you have to protect users who are going through directly like Spark SQL, Hive CLI, can I just put authorization on my metastore? Is it good enough or not? Am I right? That was your first question. Metastore is enough or not?
Is there any dependency to have to block metastore? That is the question. Like,
so my thing is like metastore blocking, non-blocking is not going to make any difference.
There are several problems in this part. So the first one is there is no concept of authorization at the metastore layer. So metastore is all or nothing.
that's only ACLs we have.
Yeah, right. So if you give, like say Hive CLI or Spark access to the metastore, you're done, because they can go and whack all your table definitions, your column definitions, and so on. Protecting the metastore itself is not enough because they can go wipe your data or copy your data. That's the other way they'll get you, right? So if you are going to use these three ways, then unfortunately storage-based authorization is the only true way that you have of securing access. Are you using Hive ACID as well?
There are 1.2.
1.2.
Hive 1.2.
Hive 1.2, HTTP 2.4. Got it. So you'll see that in future versions of HTTP, there are, so we've added support for transactions with the Hive ACID merge functionality and support for schema evolution. With these kinds of features, it gets this interrupt that you have between Spark and Hive is going to get progressively more painful.
So the standard is like use only Hive.
Correct. So increasingly what you're going to see is both Hive and Spark are evolving in a way where they are becoming more like database engines. It's not that you have a file format that any engine can pick up and use. As we have had to make these systems more featureful with updates or more performant with the cost-based optimizer and statistics and the standard games that we database guys have to play to get performance, you can see that then the engine and the format are becoming more and more intimate with each other, which means then you can't have, literally we saw that Spark and Hive are evolving along the same dimensions in different ways. So the way Hive's had a cost-based optimizer for a couple releases now. Spark is going to add one in the next release. But Spark's notion of statistics is different from Hive's notion of statistics. Spark's notion of bucketing is different from Hive's notion of bucketing. I'm sure Spark will add DML support, but the way Spark will do transactions will be different from the way Hive does transactions. Right? So all of these corner cases have never worked, but for a lot of people who only have used like either older versions or sort of the 80% that works for them, it's been okay. But the 20% that doesn't work can lead to data corruption or wrong results, which is why we are saying, especially with GDPR, we expect people to start doing updates to the data, like consent or forget my information, things like that, right to be forgotten, things like that. Then going forward, it's going to be more important that these systems are more accurate than they have been in the past. So I think going forward, that's why we separated out. In HTTP3, you'll see there's separate metastores. There's interop. You can treat these things as external tables and you can look at them from each other, but there's a notion of one of these systems is the master. And that's where updates definitely should go through, is through that master. So does that kind of make sense? Cool. Thank you. Sorry, didn't mean to.
One more probably last question. From Atlas perspective, we want to have Atlas, like a centralized Atlas as a repository for all clusters. So do you have any vision for that or any roadmaps on that?
That's what we have been saying. Atlas is going to be the centralized metastore for everything, not just the Hadoop. So I guess you are referring to non-Hadoop data.
So
multiple
Hadoop clusters and
right. Multiple cluster. Atlas is not actually data cluster in terms of metadata. You can store multiple clusters, but all the wiring has to be done so that the Hive running in other clusters will report to us central Atlas. And then there is a question of whether you have the same user, because in a production environment, Atlas is going to be in a curve price. So you need to have the same identity across all your clusters. If these conditions are met, and if you do the wiring correctly, then Atlas, a single Atlas can actually take the metadata across multiple clusters. Even the Ranger is also built the same way. You can have a single Ranger which can have policies for any number of clusters, but you need to have the right wiring done.
because I was confused by question, do we have Atlas on the same cluster, on a separate cluster? So if that's the case, why it's relevant?
There are two answers actually. One is there is a notion of a shared service Atlas kind of concept, which is we are doing that more from a cloud perspective. It's not as much an on-prem construct. But for your use case where you have just multiple, it's not the question of having multiple atlases there. If you have a way to get to it from one place, which is Data Storage Studio, you'll be still able to leverage all of them from a single pane of glass. So the question really becomes, can you do all of those updates? And say, for example, you want to associate a term with multiple assets that are sitting in different places, you still have that challenge. So instead, what we are looking at is the case where we're exposing all these functions via Data Storage Studio. So even if you have multiple Atlas running for local performance or other reasons, then you can still get a single view of all of that information in Data Storage Studio. So in your case, when you have multiple such large clusters, the better answer might be Data Storage Studio for you to look at in how that works.
This question is so much fun that all three of us are going to get a crack at it. So I guess the question for you is, are you looking for a single pane of glass, like what he is describing? Or what's in your mind for a global
So
Atlas?
in my mind, we have many entities which are located on multiple clusters. So let's say we have users table which can be located on all our Hadoop clusters.
Okay.
So what we want to see is kind of view where if I want to see user table, I want to see on where it is on all clusters, kind of like from a searching perspective.
Got it. So that is, to me, that feels like a single pane of glass-like scenario. So DSS would be one place where we would go surface that. The other would be what Srikanth said for in the cloud context. If you have multiple physical clusters, but logically it's one data lake, then we do want to support the concept of one. But I think that conceptually that doesn't address your use case because you have multiple logical data lakes.
Right. So is it also the use case you're trying to find if the data is duplicated, or when would they have the same copy in multiple clusters? In this case, that user.
That is one of them.
Yes.
I see. Okay. So you're just trying to see how it's proliferating across.
So we have some data can be duplicated for various reasons, and in addition, what we want to kind of have. To use Atlas as a meta store where we can provide for users not only just the physical metadata, for example, but also logical metadata when data was updated last time, and so on. And from that logical perspective, we want to provide view to users. Let's say if we have cluster A and cluster B, and that data was updated on cluster A, but not updated on cluster B. So kind of, and provide some services around that as well.
So your thought is that these are metadata properties that you would have, or you want to have relationships between them that you want to track around? Is this duplicated or partially duplicated or something like that?
As a simple view, it's some relations, some metadata properties, for example. Okay. On a grand view, we want to have business entity associated, kind of hierarchical business entity associated with physical objects.
Oh, okay. So, all right. So for the business term association and things like that, we have a full-blown business catalog in Atlas 1.0. So that will give you the ability to, have any business constructs, and then business constructs, you'll have a glossary with the terms that are specific to the business that may or may not have any manifestation physically to objects that exist in Hadoop. And then you can correlate that to the objects in Hadoop, or you can also attach classifications against that business term. So we also allow that, tags or classifications against that business term. The idea here is in your case, if you want a consistent way to manage that business glossary, then the data plane answer will be the better one for you, because in that case, you can now go to DSS in one place, define this, and then I want to be able to associate this user X, this user Y with this some kind of a term or a tag that is indicating the fact that they are related to each other. There's also a relationship, first-class relationship construct that exists in Atlas 1.0. So that may be another way to say we could do some kind of crawling and say these are related to each other and have a relationship around that. So, I mean, we need to double-click into that and figure out, where, what your exact use case is.
We're avoiding making eye contact with you because we don't know how to crawl across data.
It's going to happen over time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So one of the challenges I remember one asked from you earlier, you have Atlas running outside and you have Hive running 2.4, and Hive wants to publish data to the Atlas which is running outside, right? So there are version dependency you have to be a little bit cautious of, because the latest Atlas uses Kafka 1.0. The earlier version was using different versions, so there might be incompatibility between these Kafka versions. And also, the Atlas server you have should be a later version than the hook you have. For example, you can't have a 3.0 Hive where 3.0 Atlas hook runs, and then you can't have an Atlas from 2.5 or 2.6. So these version compatibilities.
Agree. So what we did is we have hundreds of clients, so we can't actually deploy the hooks on all these clients, right? That's practically impossible.
So on the clients, you mean? Hive CLI?
Hive clients, right? And because majority of the workload goes through Metastore. I would say 99% of the users are contacting for Spark and Hive workload. They are contacting Metastore, and only probably 1% goes through Hive Server 2. So Hive Server 2 has the Atlas hook, but Metastore, there is no way to capture DDL. Changes on happening on the Metastore. So what we did is we developed the Metastore hook, so that we don't need to deploy any more Atlas hooks on the client side.
That makes sense.
And so we verified that it is working. The Metastore hook is able to post the events to Atlas 2.6 from 2.4 Hive.
Okay.
So that flow is working at this point.
Awesome. Okay.
So Hive is covered, but Hdfs is something we are still.
So what would be great is if maybe we should look at that as a community contribution from eBay. So if you guys can contribute that back, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. That is in the plan actually.
Yeah.
And that'll be awesome. I think some people have already asked about Hive Metastore.
There was actually a
for
design for something for a while. For a Ranger plugin for a Hive Metastore was there at some point. I don't know. I don't think it ever got implemented though.
So which route did you take? Did you send via Kafka or make a REST API call?
Currently we are making a REST API call.
Okay, so that
B2 call, but we can actually do it with Kafka as well.
Okay. So Kafka, you might run into versioning issues. REST API call is probably better there.
Okay. Maybe we'll open a Jira and let's have a discussion, and then we can actually.
For Hdfs, actually, we are really looking for use cases. And so
I'm like, let's have a discussion.
Right, we'll discuss this further. Yeah.
That we need everywhere. We need in Atlas, we need in DSS, so everywhere we need the ability.
Sure. At least I'm like a particular data set, right? I'm like, we want to have some kind of mechanism without affecting the name node performance.
Right. So you want to have a filter on what you want to watch and what you don't want to watch, right?
Right. At this point, what we are planning to do is we have FS image loaded on a per day basis on a OIV table. So we are actually doing like running applications on top of that and creating a delta and posting it on Atlas. But that's a lot of work.
We were actually looking at we were looking at the FS image, and we were also looking at what is
iNotify.
iNotify interface.
That is also another thing.
Yeah.
Actually, we have gone through all the, what is the first one we tried? HDFS, iNotify, no. There is, instead of using Atlas, like we actually meta tag on HDFS meta tag. I forgot what it's called. So that is the first thing. Extended attributes, right?
Extended attributes, yeah.
So that is the first way we started with this, doing the tagging, probably a year back. Now we are in Atlas. iNotify,
Yeah, I think that's the important thing is to understand, what your specific use cases are. Then we can figure out what configurations you need, like, in terms of optimizing the hook. Because watching everything doesn't make any sense. You're going to flood you with a lot of nonsense that you don't care about, right? So why even bother harvesting that if you don't care about those paths?
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
All right.
It was very helpful. Good discussion.
Thank you.